السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق الله سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين وصحبه الأخيار المنتجبين وعلى جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، يقول الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم. Chapter 49, verse number 12. O you who believe, avoid much suspicions. Indeed, some suspicions are sins. And spy not, neither backbite one another. Would one of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? You would hate it, so hate backbiting. And fear Allah. Verily, Allah is the one who accepts repentance. Allah is the most merciful. It is narrated that the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لا تطلبوا عثرات المؤمنين. Do not go and track the flaws of the believers. لا تطلبوا عثرات المؤمنين فإن من تتبع عثرات أخيه تتبع الله عثرته. For whoever tracks the mistakes of his peer, Allah will track his mistakes. And whoever, the hadith continues, and whomever Allah tracks his mistakes, Allah exposes him, even in his own very house. A toxic character, a toxic person, my dear brothers, my dear sisters, is someone who sees not but negativities and negatives in the other people. If you want to take it to the active sense, a toxic person also sometimes tries to go and chase the mistakes of people, their flaws, their defects, their deficiencies, their weaknesses. It tries to count them, tries to track them. And this person himself might have these defects or these flaws. And actually, it might be a reason that someone might want to track the flaws of others so that he would cover up for his own, so that he might feel better. To see that those people are bad, I'm good, I'm better. I'm not that bad. I'm bad, but I'm not that bad, yeah? Makes someone feel a bit better, actually. So, one would try to cover his own flaws sometimes by going and exposing other people's defects. And if this means something, it means that someone is actually spending the time and the energy in the wrong place. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the teachings of Islam commanded us to spend time introspecting, to spend our energy bettering ourselves rather than comparing ourselves to the others in that negative sense. Actually, you should compare yourself to yourself yesterday. That's how you develop, that's how you progress. Yeah? Don't compare yourself to someone else who has different potential than you. Don't compare your children to some other children by some strengths that their children have but yours don't have. So make sure that they compete. People compete against own selves yesterday. Tomorrow I should be better than myself today. That's how the competitions should be. So whoever tracks the slips and defects of other people tries to appear to be, perfect in the eyes of others, and in fact he would not be removing these flaws and defects of his own self, and he would not be solving his problem, creating maybe more problems. The reality of life, my dear brothers, my dear sisters, is that it is not constant. Days come and go. The time moves on, but circumstances change. Today, someone else's flaws are exposed to you, but tomorrow you don't know if your own flaws and defects will be exposed to other people. Life changes, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And these days we alternate amongst the people in fortune. Today is good for you, tomorrow is not. Or like Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali bin Abi Talib, alayhi salam, where he says, الدهر يومان يوم لك ويوم عليك. That life is 2 days. One day is with you, but the next day is against you. So make sure you behave well in the day that is for you, and you prepare for the day that is against you. So circumstances change. Now, one thing that is also very important to note is that sometimes when someone spends so much time and energy trying to expose other people's mistakes and flaws, sometimes it might appear to be like this person is hiding something. You know? Sometimes you expose your own self when you focus on someone else. This person is so arrogant. Imagine I'm saying now, oh, this person is arrogant. I am not. I have good ethics. Isn't it a bit paradoxical? When you accuse people of being unethical, when you practically now have actually invalidated your own ethical values or conduct. Right? So sometimes when you emphasize something about someone else, some people start suspecting you. What are you hiding then? Why are you focusing so much on other people? Or like in Arabic, it is said, كَادَ الْمُرِيبُ أَنْ يَقُولَ خُذُونِي. Sometimes you try to deflect something from your own self, but actually you're inviting attention to your own self. This is a way that you're exposing your own self as well with your conduct. So, my dear brothers, my dear sisters, we must confront our own selves very confidently. If someone else has flaws and defects, I also have flaws and defects. Think this way. What does the other person have? Do other people have knowledge? Do I lack knowledge? Is my ignorance a flaw? Okay. People might point at me and say, this person is ignorant. Or this person has done such and such, sins. Or this person's conduct is not good. Okay, turn to your own self and think, how can I change it? Can I go and gain more knowledge? Do I have some arrogance? Do I have some envy in my heart? Do I have some sicknesses in my heart? Let me address them. Let me address them. Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah. And then when you do, you should not then feel ashamed if other people go and remind you of mistakes that you've done in the past. You have nothing now. You're pure in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of your reputation. Allah is in control of the image of you that people have in their minds. It is in Allah's control. Ya muqallibal qulub. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala flips the hearts like we flip a ring in our fingers. People's love towards you, people's respect towards you, it's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You please God. Don't worry about anything else. So things are in God's control. And what does the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say in that hadith? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. That whoever tracks the defects and flaws of the mu'mineen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will track his flaws. And Allah will expose him even in his own house. There are repercussions of these activities. Now this hadith, we could understand it in two ways. One is that it's in the nature of this world that when you set out on actually following people's mistakes so that you can remind them of them at some day and score points against them, the nature of this world is that the days will change. Your day will come next. That's a natural law that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put. Allah will expose him. Or no, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the second way we understand it is that Allah, if you do this, He would hasten your punishment. Punishment by you tasting what you're making other people taste. Not because Allah has beef with you. Not because Allah has problems with you. Allah does this so that He brings you back to your balance. So that He brings you back to your senses. Isn't this what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter 9 verse 94? وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِنْ قَرْيَةٍ مِنْ نَبِيٍّ إِلَّا أَخَذْنَا أَهْلَهَا بِالْبَأْسَاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَضَّرَّعُونَ. Whenever we sent a prophet to a society, we afflicted them with difficulties, challenges, calamities. Why? We afflicted its people with suffering and adversity. So perhaps they would be humble. So perhaps they would go back to their senses. They would go back to their balance. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would afflict us a lot of times. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala afflicts us to remind us. So this is another way to understand this hadith. Now let me finish with some practical measures. What are some practical things that we can do when we see and observe any deficiency in someone else? any defect, any flaw in other people? What are active or steps that we can make sure we do? Number one, try to think why they are doing this. If you see, for example, someone who attacks the religion, who, let's say, badmouths the religious people, who disrespects religion, yeah? That's a flaw, that's a defect in our vision, isn't it? Try to understand why first. Why are they doing this? Is it that they have a misunderstanding, some misunderstanding of the deen? Could it be that the way they were brought up by people who claimed to be religious and these were terrible people? Could this be a reason? Could it be that this person is ignorant and does not know about the true teachings of the religion? What does our 8th Imam, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, say? That teach people our teachings because what? لو علموا محاسن كلامنا لاتبعونا. If people know how beautiful our speech is, they would follow us. Maybe people don't know the true teachings of Islam or the religion. All they know is some terrible things they've heard or they've seen here and there from religious people. If someone, for example, you see someone likes to buy expensive things, okay? Think, why? Could it be that this person, this is all they know? This is how they were brought up. That's all they know about life. Could it be that they probably grew up in a sense of insecurity around people, and the only way they see security is by displaying something that, makes them appear to be wealthy? It could be. Try to understand the reason behind things. Number two, think, how can I help them to cure it? If I were in their shoes, what would I do? Someone does not know about deen. How can I devise a plan and give them that plan so that they can actually learn about deen, learn about the true teachings of the religion? How can I do that? Can I devise a plan practically? Can I move from a position of being judgmental, to a position of actually trying to guide people, trying to help them solve their problems, help them cure their problems? Active approach, rather than a judgmental approach. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. So think about this. If someone has a sense of insecurity, how can I help them be more spiritual, connect to God? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of the true security. When someone is spiritual enough, they would understand that nothing else gives me security except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How can I help people do that? Inshallah, this way you would be a way or a means to guide people towards the right path. Number three, turn to yourself and ask, do I have flaws like this? Could I have defects and flaws that I see in people but I don't see in myself? Try to introspect. Try to think about them. Try to find them. There's a hadith that says it is enough discipline for you to dislike from yourself what you dislike from people towards you. Yeah, the golden rule, if you've heard about it. You would like people to treat you the way you like people. You would treat people the way you would like them to treat you, isn't it? Simple. It's a universal kind of rule. Number four, try to curb your curiosity. We're so curious sometimes. We want to spy, we want to know secrets. Now, try to curb your curiosity. Try not to spy, for example. If you walk by a neighborhood and your neighbor's door is open and they might be talking about things, try to move away, listen to something else. Actively train yourself that you protect other people's privacy. You don't expose them. Even if they are exposed, you make sure that you cover that what should not be exposed. If their windows are open, you make sure you look away. You make sure that you help them not expose anything that should not be exposed. Train yourself not to spy. Train yourself to avoid gossip, because gossip sometimes spreads these things, defects or deficiencies or flaws of people. And sometimes we might talk about people backbiting, We might talk behind their backs and say, well, look, I'm talking about him, but I want good for him. I want to help him. Well, Habibi, you help him by speaking to him, not speaking behind his back about him. Okay, that's ghiba, right? So make sure that we do it the right way. May I ask my dear brothers, please, to step forward so that you allow more comments to have some space. Please recite Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And the last tip that we should always make sure we are heedful of is to think, could I be wrong in that judgment? And this is something that we don't often do. Could I be wrong? That person that I saw across the street, I waved at her, for example, and she didn't wave back. She didn't acknowledge back. How arrogant is she? Huh? How arrogant she is. How could she do this? Could it be that she did not see you? Could it be that her mind is occupied by something else, is actually not seeing? Did we think of this? Or sometimes there are some norms that become established in a community that we think they are the correct way. For example, let me just say, for the sake of argument, if let's say there is an understanding or expectation that if you're wealthy, you should be driving a swag car. Huh? You should be driving a very fancy car. That's an expectation. Or that if someone is wealthy, he should be someone who, whenever he likes something or she likes something, she has to buy it and taste it. And if she doesn't, something is wrong. And then when we see someone actually depriving himself from something very nice and tasty, because he is maybe disciplining his own self, his own soul, we might be criticizing. We say, why are you doing this to yourself? And in a community where it encourages, consumerism, individualism, that you should be happy, you should seek happiness and material enjoyments, sometimes a community might have this as a norm. And if someone does not abide by this norm, then they are wrong. If we judge people by these norms, then who's wrong? Are we not wrong in the first place to succumb to these kind of norms? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, that He would help us and allow us to focus on our own selves, to track our own flaws and to address them as soon as possible, inshallah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وخيرتك من خلقك وحبيبك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين، عبدك ووصيك، عبدك ووليك ووصي رسولك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم. وصل على الصديقة الكبرى فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. وصل على سبطي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين. صل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي، حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله والورع عن محارمه. My dear brothers, my dear sisters, the servants of God, I advise yourselves, I enjoin yourselves and myself to observe taqwa, to fear Allah and to stay away from what He has prohibited. Recently I was forwarded a clip of some imams of mosques or speakers in mosques. What they would be saying is things like hate speech, equivalent to what? Cursing the Jews, for example, and praying against the Jewish people. I find myself responsible of calling this out and saying that these brothers and these leaders or preachers or speakers, they need to stand corrected, they need to be corrected. Because if the reason they're saying this is to support their brothers and sisters in Palestine, they're actually doing more harm than good. They're doing more harm than good. In what? In depicting the conflict as a conflict of religion, Muslims against Jewish people, or our problem is with the Jewish people, which is certainly not the case. If a Muslim burglar attacks your house, what would you say? Would you say a Muslim attacked my house? Or would you say a burglar attacked my house? Muslimness is irrelevant in here. If a Jewish person steals your land, would you say it's a Jewish person or the Jews stole my land? Or would you say these thieves stole my land? Jewishness is irrelevant here. So it's very important to identify who the foe is before we attempt to try to solve the problem. And the foe in here is the Zionist, actually. It's not Jewish people. There are Jewish people on your side, There's so many Jewish people on your side. So the Zionism is the problem. And Zionism is what? Is this political movement that aims at what? Establishing a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. And they are supporting what is called today Israel. So this is the problem. It's with these people. Although Judaism is a part or an aim in this stated aim of what? National home for the Jewish people. But it's not Jewish. It's not, our problem is not with the Jewish people. That's very important to remind ourselves of in the first place. I'll try to spend a couple of minutes, inshallah, or maybe a bit more if you allow me, to continue the historical coverage or background that allows us to understand why we are in this situation today. So last time we mentioned that the British Royal Commission of 1931, who went to Palestine trying to understand what the Palestinians' situation is after the conflict that erupted, after the riots that also erupted back then, and this commission concluded that the Palestinian Arabs refused to cooperate on what? In any form of government other than a national government for all the national inhabitants of Palestine, which is a very reasonable thing to ask for. And yet the Jewish community, in establishing a national home inside Palestine, practically they've started a state within a state. Now this Royal Commission concluded that the situation in Palestine reached a deadlock, whereby the British government cannot now be faithful to what? The Palestinian Arab requirement for a national home for themselves, the recognizing a Palestinian Arab claim to national independence of all its inhabitants from one end, and on the other end, the claims or the promises that the British gave to the Zionist organization to establish a national home in Palestine. So these are now conflicting. And this commission, they recommended partitioning Palestine into one Arab state and one Jewish state, with Jerusalem being an enclave that is put under kind of international supervision or mandate. Now, neither the Palestinians accepted this, nor the Zionists accepted this. The Palestinians refused the division of their land, obviously, and refused the establishment of a Jewish kind of state in their ancestral land. And the Zionists refused this as it is negating the Balfour Promise or the Balfour Declaration and the mandate. Further negotiations in London failed, and I'm reading this from the article that is titled The Question of Palestine, and you can find it on the UN website, and this was published in 1980. Further negotiations in London failed, and then in May 1939, the British government announced that now Palestine, instead of partition, it would become in 1949, that's in 10 years from then, it would become a unified independent state with both Jews and Arabs sharing in government, administration and rule, which is more reasonable than what the Zionists are proposing. Now the Zionist organization rejected this policy. And what they did instead in 1942, they assembled in New York in what was later known as the Biltmore Program, which included a demand for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. After 3 decades of rule, the British government now decided that in February 1949 to hand the issue of Palestine to the League of Nations, the United Nations. The British government declared that, quote, faced with an irreconcilable conflict of principles in Palestine, it had reached the conclusion that the only course now open was to submit the problem to the judgment of the United Nations. After 3 decades of implementing, end quote, sorry. Now, after 3 decades of implementing the mandate, which had a big part of it, the Balfour Declaration, after this time in implementing this doctrine in a radically transformed Palestine, now the British mandate neared its end. The Jewish population has swelled from 56,000 in 1918 to 608,000 by 1946. The total population later had reached 1,850,000. That's a lot of multiples in a few decades. That's a big magnitude of growth in a few decades. Much of the immigration had been due to the Nazi persecution of the Jewish people in Europe. Palestinian Arabs sympathized with the plight of the European Jews. However, the sudden immigration brought undue hardship on the Palestinian Arab population. And since the Arabs were not responsible for the atrocities in Europe, they naturally objected to being made to suffer in turn. As the Royal Commission reports it, Let me quote this, and inshallah I'll finish with that. What did the Royal Commission say, 1931? An able Arab exponent of the Arab case told us that the Arabs throughout their history have not only been free from anti-Jewish sentiment, but have also shown that the spirit of compromise is deeply rooted in their life. There's no decent-minded person, he said, who would not want to do everything humanly possible to relieve the distress of those persons, provided that it was not at the cost of inflicting a corresponding distress on another people. I'll stop here, inshallah, for this time. Next time, inshallah, I'll cover the partition of Palestine and the establishment of what is called now the State of Israel. Just to give a bit of a context that led to the events that we are living and witnessing today. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, that He may give victory to all the oppressed in the world, that He, inshallah, may ease it up upon the innocent people, the women, the children, the men, the elders, everyone who is suffering from this conflict in every way or shape or form. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, that He may help us and enlighten us with understanding our true responsibility and with equipping ourselves with the true, proper knowledge to understand the situation and to base our actions on it. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما